Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into a topic that is, well, fundamentally reshaping how businesses understand you, the customer.
hmm
This deep dive is specifically curated for you, drawing insights directly from a fascinating article you shared from Andreessen Horowitz titled Faster, Smarter, Cheaper. AI is Reinventing Market Research.
And reinventing really is the key word there, isn't it? The material we're looking at, it lays out this really profound shift. Market research is moving away from its historical constraints towards entirely new possibilities, all thanks to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it feels like a really big deal.
It's a dynamic change, definitely, and it has significant implications for how companies will, approach understanding the world and making decisions going forward.
Okay, so to really grasp the magnitude of this shift, let's maybe set the scene a bit. There's a number in the source that immediately jumped out. Companies globally pour an astonishing $140 billion into market research each year.
Wow.
$140 billion. That's a staggering investment, isn't it?
It truly is. That number, $140 billion annually, it just underscores how absolutely vital companies consider this function.
Right.
And they spend this money for one core reason, as the article makes really clear, to better understand their customers, to understand you.
Yeah.
They need to know what makes you tick, what problems you face, what motivates your purchasing decisions, and ultimately, how to serve you better, how to predict what the market needs next.
Right. And yet, despite this colossal investment, this huge amount of money, the article immediately flags a core problem. It describes the field as having been, well, constrained. Constrained by these inherent limitations, things like slow surveys, biased panels, insights that often lag months behind what's actually happening in the market, which moves so fast these days.
Exactly. So you've got billions being spent. But businesses are still feeling held back. They're constrained by the very processes they're relying on to get clarity. That creates a significant tension,
It really does. That disconnect.
And that tension, that gap between the need for deep, timely insight and the limitations of, let's call them the traditional methods, that's precisely the problem that AI, as this source argues, is now directly addressing. It's where the pressure for change has really been building up.
Okay, so our mission then in this deep dive is to fully unpack this Andreessen Horowitz article. We're going to trace its arguments, starting with the landscape of market research before AI truly hit its stride. Then we'll look at the initial ways AI started bringing some efficiency gains. And finally, we'll zero in on what the article presents as the potential real game changer. This new approach using generative agents and simulating entire societies. Sounds wild.
It does sound wild, but the potential is huge. So our goal here is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the surprising facts, and the key insights, all strictly from the source you've provided. We'll try to explain the concepts mentioned, like these generative agents and the tech behind them, based only on the article's descriptions. And we'll discuss the implications it raises for how businesses will operate and compete. Think of this as your shortcut to getting up to speed on this rapid evolution drawn directly from the source material.
Perfect. Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's first establish the context. Let's look at the traditional landscape of market research, where things stood before this current wave of AI really took hold. The article provides a fascinating perspective on the sheer scale of the investment, pointing again to that, $140 billion annual spend.
It's hard to get your head around that number.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the article also offers some really telling comparisons to highlight where that money has historically gone and what that actually signifies.
It does, and this is really interesting. The article contrasts the market valuations of traditional consulting firms, the big names that have significant market research practices, with those of software companies that focus specifically on research tools. So it notes that firms like Gartner and McKinsey, and obviously their work goes beyond just market research, but it's a big part, they each command valuations around $40 billion.
$40 billion each. Okay, now compare that, as the article does, to companies primarily known for their market research software platforms, like Qualtrics, valued at around $12.5 billion, and Medallia at about $6.4 billion. Big companies, but much smaller valuations than the consulting giants.
Exactly. And this valuation gap, according to the source, is highly revealing. It suggests that, historically, the vast majority of the perceived value, and therefore the spending in market research, has been anchored in the human-intensive, consulting-driven approaches.
So the people, the process, the interpretation.
Precisely. Even when these large consulting firms used software, the significant cost and the perceived value were tied up in the expertise, the process management, the analysis, and, crucially, the panel recruitment, all things that humans provided. The article explicitly uses this disparity to argue that this market is basically ripe for disruption. It's ready to shift a substantial portion of that labor spend into software solutions, much like we've seen AI and automation transform other labor-heavy industries.
Interesting. So it's like a market waiting for software to really take over the heavy lifting from the human service layer.
That's the argument presented. You have companies spending these vast fortunes, primarily on human-driven services, for a process that the article describes as, well, inherently slow, often reliant on potentially biased panels,
Mhm.
and delivering insights that are frequently out of date by the time they actually arrive. That sets a very clear stage for why change was needed, why there was an opening for something new.
Makes sense. Paints a picture of inefficiency almost.
And the article then gives us a concise history of how the field evolved up to this point, showing the stepping stones that led to this current AI moment.
All right, it takes us back to the 1990s, a time described as primarily manual research. We're talking literal pen and paper for data collection, physical methods for sorting and analyzing findings. Can you even imagine?
It's hard to picture now, isn't it? Imagine the limitations. The scale was severely constrained just by human capacity. Data collection was incredibly slow, putting it all together was tedious, and analysis was this painstaking manual process.
Yeah.
Getting any insights took a significant amount of time and effort, even for relatively small studies.
Then came the early 2000s, and companies like Qualtrics and Medallia emerged. Their core innovation, which was foundational for the time, was online surveys.
Yes, moving surveys online digitized the process. That immediately offered advantages, right? Faster data collection, simpler distribution, reaching more people.
Usually.
And they didn't stop there. The source points out that these companies introduced subsequent advancements built on that online survey foundation. This included things like real-time analytics.
Oh, okay. So you can see results coming in live.
Exactly. Businesses could see survey results as they came in, rather than waiting weeks or months for a final report. They also enabled mobile-based survey collection, adapting research methods to how people were starting to live and communicate on their phones.
And these companies, Qualtrics and Medallia, they expanded beyond just surveys, didn't they?
They did. The article notes they built more comprehensive experience management tools. So these platforms use surveys as a primary engine, sure, but they expanded to track and analyze customer feedback, employee feedback, more broadly across an organization.
Trying to get a holistic view.
That was the aim, to give companies a holistic view of sentiment and experience. But still, heavily reliant on gathering data via structured survey questions, that was still the core mechanism.
Gotcha. Now, in parallel to these sort of big enterprise platforms, we saw the rise of simpler self-serve tools. The article uses SurveyMonkey as a prime example here.
Right. Tools like SurveyMonkey lowered the barrier to entry significantly. They made it possible for, individual teams or even small businesses to design and distribute basic surveys quickly and cheaply. You didn't need a dedicated research department or a massive enterprise contract anymore.
Which, on the surface, sounds great, like a democratization of research, right?
It definitely broadened access, no question. Anyone could run a quick poll. However, the article highlights a significant downside from an organizational perspective. It often led to fragmented efforts.
I can see that.
Yeah, you'd have different teams using different tools, maybe applying inconsistent methodologies, data ending up in silos all over the company.
So no central oversight.
Exactly. This resulted in limited organizational visibility, no central place to see all the research being conducted or to compare findings across different departments easily. So for large enterprises needing consistent governance, scale, and integrated insights, these self-serve tools often fell short. They weren't built for that enterprise-level coordination.
Okay, so we had the big enterprise players like Qualtrics, the self-serve tools like SurveyMonkey, and then the traditional consulting firms. They continue to be major players in market research, right? Even adopting some of these new software tools.
Absolutely. Firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, they established dedicated practices focused on consumer insights and market analysis. And while they sometimes used software like Qualtrics as part of their toolkit, their engagements were fundamentally service-led. The human element was still paramount.
And the article gives a pretty clear picture of what a typical engagement with one of these firms looked like for market research.
It does. It describes a process characterized by, well, significant investment, both time and money. These engagements often span several months.
Yes.
Yeah, months. And they could cost millions of dollars. A core component of this and a recurring theme was the reliance on recruiting and managing panels of human participants.
Right, the panels again.
Exactly. A process that was both expensive and, as the article reiterates, prone to bias depending on how the panel was recruited and managed. This panel dependency was a fundamental bottleneck in the whole system.
Can you walk us through the typical steps mentioned for one of these big consulting projects?
Sure. The source outlines a process where just recruiting a suitable panel of participants, finding the right people, could take weeks on its own.
Just finding them.
Just finding them. Then, once the panel was ready, running the actual survey or collecting the data took more time. Then came the often painstaking analysis of all that collected data, followed by the creation of the final reports and presentations. Each step was time-consuming, layering weeks upon weeks, adding up to those multi-month timelines.
And crucially, how were the results delivered? What format did they take?
This is presented as another key limitation in the source. The findings were typically delivered in a highly polished, packaged format, think detailed PowerPoint presentations, thick-bound reports. The article points out that this approach, while professional-looking, often limited the client's ability to easily revisit the raw data themselves or to perform their own deeper dives or maybe ask follow-up questions of the dataset after the consulting firm had wrapped up its work.
So it was like a snapshot, a final product.
Exactly. A final deliverable rather than a dynamic, ongoing resource you could keep querying or exploring.
Thinking about that whole process, months long, costing millions, dependent on potentially biased panels, delivering these rigid packaged results, it really underscores why the article initially described the field as constrained. It just wasn't built for speed or flexibility or continuous learning, was it?
Not at all. And those constraints had real business consequences. The article notes that most enterprises were, and often still are, limited to conducting major research efforts maybe quarterly, to inform big strategic decisions or major product launches. But in today's world, things move so fast. Businesses need insights much more frequently. You need data points to inform decisions happening every week, sometimes every day, not just once every 3 months.
And I guess because of the high cost and the time investment, testing smaller ideas or iterating quickly on concepts was often just prohibitively expensive, right?
Exactly. You couldn't justify a multi-million-dollar, multi-month research project for every potential feature tweak or variation in a marketing message. It just wasn't feasible.
So a lot of potential insights, potential product improvements, they just went untested. Lost opportunities.
That's the implication. And the source points out that even companies that recognize the need to modernize and accelerate their research found themselves hampered by the inertia of legacy systems, old tools, and ingrained slow methodologies. It's hard to change course when you're a big ship.
Okay. Now, before the full force of AI was really felt, the article mentions another wave of innovation that started challenging the status quo, maybe in the late 2010s. The rise of UX research tools.
Yes, this is an important development. This is where companies like Sprig, Maze, and Dovetail came onto the scene. Their core innovation was building tools specifically for product teams, product managers, designers, engineers, not necessarily for central research departments or external consultants.
So shifting where the research happened and who did it.
Precisely. Instead of outsourcing research or having it siloed with a dedicated central team, these tools enabled companies to embed research directly within the product development workflow itself.
Making it part of the building process.
Right. Product managers, designers, engineers could get direct user feedback as they were building and iterating on the product.
And the methods these tools used were tailored for that specific context.
Yeah.
More rapid, more integrated.
Exactly. They focused on methods like unmoderated usability tests, where users could test a product or prototype on their own time with their screen interactions recorded and analyzed automatically.
Okay.
They offered in-product surveys that could be triggered based on specific user behavior, capturing feedback right at the point of experience, and they facilitated much quicker prototype feedback loops.
The immediate benefit of this whole UX research wave seems pretty clear. Faster, more customer-informed decisions for those teams directly involved in building the product.
Absolutely. It gave those teams agility and a direct line to user feedback, which was incredibly valuable for rapid product iteration. And as the article argues, this wave demonstrated the increasing importance of having integrated research capabilities embedded directly within business workflows. That was a key lesson.
But there were limitations mentioned too.
Yes, the limitation highlighted is that these tools, while really effective for their purpose, were primarily optimized for team-level use, specifically within software development cycles. They weren't as easily adaptable, the source suggests, for non-software companies or for broader cross-functional applications, things like brand marketing strategy, sales effectiveness, or operational efficiency research across the whole company.
So powerful for product teams, but maybe not the whole organization.
That's the picture painted. So summarizing this whole traditional landscape, you have vast spending, mostly on slow, rigid, panel-dependent human services. You have software history improving speed, but still fundamentally tied to canals. You have self-serve tools causing fragmentation. And then these newer UX tools showing the power of integrated research, but maybe limited in scope.
Yeah, it really paints a clear picture of a field that was just ripe for more profound technological disruption. It sets the perfect stage for AI to arrive and, as the article title says, potentially reinvent the whole game.
Exactly. The stage was set.
So we have this landscape defined by all these limitations we've discussed: slowness, cost, potential bias, insights that lag, siloed efforts. Into this environment comes AI. The article posits that AI is a natural fit for market research. Why is that the case?
Well, if you think about it, at its most fundamental level, what is market research? It's about processing and understanding vast quantities of often unstructured data, right? Whether that's text from open-ended survey responses, audio from interviews, video recordings of user tests, or just observations of consumer behavior online or offline. It's about finding patterns, extracting sentiment, generating insights from this really complex sea of information.
Okay.
And AI, particularly with the breakthroughs we've seen in large language models or LLMs and related technologies, is exceptionally well-suited to handling, analyzing, and making sense of these very types of data. And it can do it at a scale and speed that was previously just unimaginable for humans.
So the nature of the task aligns really well with what AI is good at.
Precisely. The source then details the initial ways AI started to impact the field, primarily by bringing significant speed and efficiency gains to existing processes. It wasn't necessarily changing the type of research initially, but making it much faster.
Right, like how? What were the first impacts?
Well, it describes how AI could take tasks that were once manual and incredibly time-consuming and make them almost instantaneous. For example, generating initial drafts of survey questions or even entire survey structures. AI could whip those up quickly, providing a solid starting point that human researchers could then refine.
Saving a lot of upfront time.
Exactly. It also enabled more dynamic survey experiences, so allowing the survey questions themselves to adapt in real time based on the respondents' previous answers or known characteristics. That level of personalization and flexibility wasn't easily achievable with traditional static surveys.
And a really major impact was seen in the analysis phase, wasn't it? That seems like a huge bottleneck historically.
Oh, absolutely critical. The article notes that analysis time, which, as we discussed, historically took weeks as researchers manually coded qualitative responses or crunched quantitative data, could now be slashed to mere hours.
Wow, weeks to hours.
Yeah. AI can process thousands of open-ended text responses, identify key themes, categorize feedback, perform statistical analysis, all at lightning speed. This dramatically reduces that painful lag time between collecting the data and actually getting actionable insights from it.
That alone seems like a huge benefit for businesses needing to move quickly.
Definitely. They also mentioned the concept of insight libraries. What's that about?
Oh, yes. This points to the cumulative learning potential of these AI-powered platforms. As these tools process data from multiple research projects over time, the AI can actually learn from that growing data set.
So it gets smarter over time.
In a sense, yes. It can start to spot subtle patterns or correlations across different projects or maybe across different customer segments that a human analyst might miss or would take much, much longer to find by manually comparing reports.
Okay.
It can also potentially extrapolate early signals from smaller initial data sets, helping researchers identify emerging trends sooner. So it builds this compounding knowledge base within the platform itself, learning from everything it processes.
Interesting. So it's not just analyzing one study, but potentially connecting dots across studies.
Exactly. Now, the article emphasizes that this initial wave of AI, the one focused on speed and efficiency, isn't just about making research marginally faster or cheaper. It has broader strategic implications. Beyond just making research more accessible to smaller companies because of the lower cost and faster turnaround.
Yes, while that increased accessibility is definitely a vital outcome, the source stresses another crucial impact. It expands the set of decisions within a company that can realistically be informed by data.
What kind of decisions are we talking about here? Things that weren't data-driven before.
Well, the article contrasts the old model where, remember, detailed research might only inform those major quarterly strategic decisions or big product launches with the new potential. Now, data can potentially inform decisions ranging from refining really early product concepts or testing multiple variations of a feature or message quickly, to exploring really nuanced questions about product positioning or specific marketing messages, or even the needs of very niche customer segments.
Things you couldn't justify a big study for previously.
Exactly. These types of iterative, tactical, or highly specific questions were often just too expensive and too slow to tackle with traditional methods, which meant those decisions were often made based on gut instinct or anecdote or very limited data. AI changes the economics, making it feasible to bring data to bear on a much wider array of day-to-day business questions.
And does this also mean that more people across the organization can benefit from or even directly use these AI-powered tools, not just the dedicated researchers?
Precisely. The article highlights that these newer tools are being adopted by a much broader range of users, well beyond the traditional market research department. It specifically lists teams like marketing, product development, sales, customer success, and even senior leadership using these tools directly.
So it's breaking down silos.
That seems to be the trend. It represents a move away from research being this siloed function, maybe seen as slow or academic, towards becoming a more integrated, accessible resource for various stakeholders across the company who need to understand customers and markets to do their jobs effectively.
Okay, so summing up this first wave. Significant gains in speed, cost reduction, accessibility for more companies and more types of decisions, and broader adoption within organizations. Sounds pretty good.
It was a major step forward.
But the article is careful to state that even with these really significant improvements, this first wave of AI-powered surveys still faces fundamental constraints.
That's a critical distinction the source makes. While AI dramatically improves the processing and the analysis of the data once you've collected it,
Right.
the data collection itself in this model is still fundamentally tied to the limitations of human panels. You still need to find people, recruit them, manage them, get them to take your surveys or participate in your studies. The front-end problem remained.
And this reliance on human panels, as the article points out again, introduces significant challenges, doesn't it?
It really does. It means that the research providers, the companies offering these AI tools, are often dependent on third-party recruiting firms to find these human participants.
Right. They don't usually own the panels themselves.
Often not. And this dependency limits their control over pricing. They're subject to the costs charged by the recruiters. It also limits their ability to truly differentiate themselves purely on the basis of their technology, because they might all be drawing from potentially similar and often finite or potentially biased pools of respondents.
So the quality bottleneck is still the people providing the answers.
Exactly. The quality, the representativeness, the availability, the cost of that human panel becomes a bottleneck and a source of variability that even the most advanced AI analysis engine can't entirely overcome. If the input data from the panel is flawed or limited, the output will be too, no matter how smart the AI.
Got it. So while AI made the back end the analysis, the reporting faster and smarter, the front end, actually getting the human data, was still tied to many of the same old bottlenecks. The article makes it clear. This was a big step forward, absolutely, but it wasn't the ultimate end state, not the full reinvention it envisions.
Precisely. It set the stage for something even more transformative.
And this constraint, this persistent reliance on human panels, leads us directly to what the article presents as potentially the truly revolutionary game changer. The idea of moving beyond human panels entirely, using generative agents and simulated societies instead.
This is where the concept really takes a leap, doesn't it? It moves from just enhancing existing methods to potentially creating an entirely new paradigm for research.
Yeah.
The article introduces this by referencing a specific, apparently landmark academic paper called Generative Agents, Interactive Simulacra of Human Behavior.
Interactive simulacra of human behavior. Okay, that definitely sounds like something out of science fiction. What's the core idea from this paper, as the source describes it?
Well, the fundamental concept is creating these simulated characters, or agents, that are powered by large language models, LLMs. But they're designed specifically to exhibit increasingly human-like behaviors and interactions within a simulated environment, like a little digital world.
So they're not just simple chatbots. They can act more like people.
That's the idea. They aren't just simple scripted bots. They possess specific capabilities, according to the source, that allow them to act with a degree of autonomy, context awareness, and even apparent intentionality.
Okay, what are those key capabilities mentioned in the source that enable this more human-like behavior in these agents?
The source specifically highlights three core components driving this: memory, reflection, and planning.
Okay, let's break those down. Memory.
Memory allows the agent to retain information about its past interactions, its experiences, observations it's made within the simulation. It essentially builds up a personal history over time.
Makes sense. Reflection.
Reflection enables the agent to process and synthesize those memories and experiences. It's like it can think about what happened, draw higher level conclusions, identify patterns in its own experience, or maybe update its understanding or beliefs based on what it has encountered within the simulation.
So it learns from its simulated past. And planning.
And planning gives the agent the ability to actually set goals for itself, break those goals down into sub-steps, and then pursue those goals over time within the simulated environment. It can decide it wants to do something and figure out how.
Wow.
The combination of these three things, memory, reflection, planning, allows these agents to exhibit really complex behaviors that go way beyond simple responses to prompts. It enables them to adapt, evolve, and interact in surprisingly sophisticated ways within their simulated world.
The article notes that while the initial academic interest in this technology might have been focused on, building these lifelike simulated societies for general social science research, perhaps, its implications reach far beyond just academic curiosity.
Absolutely. And the source is quite direct in identifying what it considers one of its most promising commercial applications of market research.
Yeah.
It sees this technology not just as a fascinating academic exercise, but as a potentially powerful new tool for understanding real-world human behavior on a massive scale.
Okay, so let's bridge that gap. How do you actually translate this idea of simulating human-like behavior into practical market research?
Yeah.
How does this replace or go beyond the surveys and focus groups we've been talking about?
Well, the fundamental shift is in the source of the data. Instead of recruiting actual people to form a research panel,
Right.
companies can now potentially simulate entire populations or societies composed of these generative AI agents.
Okay.
And importantly, these simulated populations can be designed to mirror the specific characteristics of a target demographic, say, young urban professionals or retired homeowners or whatever group a company needs to understand.
So you build a virtual version of your target market.
That's the concept. Once you've created this simulated society of agents, you can interact with it in various ways. You can query them, introduce stimuli like a new product concept or an ad campaign, or ask them specific questions. You can observe them, watch how they interact with each other, how they react to simulated content, or how they navigate a simulated environment like a virtual store.
Yeah.
And you can run experiments, introduce a change like a price drop or a new feature, and observe the agent's collective and individual reactions over time. The goal is to model real human behavior and predict market responses within a controlled, scalable, and much faster environment.
That still feels a little abstract, maybe. To make it really concrete, the article provides this fantastic, vivid example. Researching a new skincare product launch in France. Can you walk us through that specific scenario in detail, pulling out all the elements the source describes?
Yeah, it's a great illustration because it makes the potential very tangible. The scenario involves a beauty company, right? And they're planning to launch a new skincare product specifically targeting the French market.
Okay, so the goal is clear. Understand how this specific product might be received by the relevant consumers in that particular country, France.
Exactly. So instead of running focus groups in Paris or sending out surveys across France, the company could use this technology to simulate a population of, say, 10,000 AI agents.
10,000 agents. I mean, that scale is just vastly beyond most traditional focus groups or even very large survey panels, isn't it?
It really is. That's one of the immediate potential advantages scale. And crucially, these agents aren't generic. They are modeled specifically on the target demographic for this particular product launch, Gen Z and millennial French beauty consumers.
So you tailor the simulation to the exact group you care about.
Precisely. That's critical for the relevance of the research. You need the simulated population to reflect the people we're actually trying to sell to.
Okay, but how are these simulated agents made realistic? How do you make 10,000 AI agents actually behave like French Gen Z or millennial beauty consumers? Where does that realism come from?
This is where the concept of seeding the data comes in. And the source is quite specific about the types of real-world data used to build these agent profiles. Each agent isn't a blank slate. It's seeded with rich, diverse data from multiple sources to give it a simulated history, personality, preferences, and context.
Okay, what kinds of data sources are mentioned?
The article lists several key ones. First, customer reviews. Real reviews for existing beauty products provide insights into the language people use, their common preferences, pain points they have with current products, and the outcomes they desire from skincare.
Makes sense. Capturing the voice of the customer.
Exactly. Second, CRM histories. Simulating data from customer relationship management systems gives agents a history of past purchases, interactions with brands, maybe service experiences. This helps model things like brand loyalty or typical purchase habits.
So there's simulated background.
Right. Third, social listening insights. This is really key for capturing current trends and zeitgeist. The article specifically mentions using data from TikTok trends related to skincare routines.
Ah, so embedding real-time cultural relevance.
Precisely. This injects awareness of popular ingredients, current skincare techniques, influential figures online, and generally how the target group talks about and engages with beauty topics on social media right now.
Very cool. What else?
And finally, past purchase behavior. Reinforcing the value of historical transactional data, what people actually bought, to make the agent's simulated buying decisions more realistic based on typical consumer patterns observed in that specific demographic in the past.
So you're essentially building these agents with this detailed, multi-layered profile synthesized from all these different real-world data streams about the target market. It sounds incredibly data-intensive.
It absolutely is. The quality and richness of the seeding data are presumably critical to the simulation's fidelity.
Okay, so now you have these 10,000 simulated French beauty consumers.
Mhm.
What do they actually do within this simulated society? How does the research happen?
The simulation environment itself is designed to mimic relevant aspects of the real world that influence consumer behavior, especially in beauty. According to the source, the agents within this simulation, first, they interact with each other. This simulates social dynamics, peer recommendations, word of mouth, the spread of opinions or trends within a community. Peer influence is huge in consumer behavior, particularly in categories like beauty, right?
Definitely. What your friends think matters.
Exactly. Second, they view simulated influencer content. This models the impact of digital media and social media influencers. The company could test how a simulated product launch, perhaps featuring specific types of influencer content, might perform within this population.
So you can test marketing strategies within the simulation.
That's the potential. Third, they shop virtual store shelves. Agents can browse products, compare options, and make purchase decisions in a simulated retail environment, modeling aspects of the actual shopping journey.
Okay, simulating the point of sale.
Right. And fourth, they post product opinions in AI-generated social feeds. After interacting with or maybe purchasing the product within the simulation, agents can generate simulated reviews, comments, or social media posts. This provides immediate, large-scale feedback and allows the company to capture simulated public sentiment and discourse about their product.
Wow. So you get simulated purchase behavior and simulated online buzz or reviews.
That's the idea. And the article also notes a really crucial point. These agents aren't static. They evolve over time within the simulation.
How does that work?
Well, drawing on those capabilities, we talked about memory and reflection. The agents learn from their experiences within the simulation, whether that's interacting with the new skincare product, seeing new influencer content, or discussing it with other simulated agents. Their preferences, opinions, and even their simulated behaviors can change over time based on these simulated experiences, just like real consumers evolve based on new information and interactions.
That dynamic aspect feels really important for realism. Consumers aren't static.
Exactly. It aims to capture that dynamism. So just contrasting that detailed skincare example with, say, a traditional focus group of 8 people in a room or a static online survey. The scale is vastly different. The integration of social dynamics and digital media consumption is unique. The ability to simulate interactions and purchase decisions over time. It really is a fundamentally different approach to research.
Yeah, it offers the potential for a level of scale, speed, and contextual richness that traditional methods really struggle to match, doesn't it? Getting feedback from thousands of simulated consumers interacting in a more naturalistic, dynamic environment. It's mind-boggling.
It is. The potential is enormous, assuming the simulations can achieve sufficient fidelity.
Now, it's clear from that example this isn't just about throwing some data into a standard off-the-shelf LLM. The article makes a point of describing the sophisticated technology stack that's required to make these realistic simulations actually work. What are the key technical components that the source cites?
Right. It emphasizes that this requires more than just basic LLMs. It relies on a growing stack of sophisticated techniques working together.
Okay, let's try to break those down. First one mentioned is persistent memory architectures.
Yes, this is foundational. Persistent memory architectures are what give the agents the ability to retain information over extended periods to build that history we talked about.
Go.
This memory is typically seated and grounded in that rich qualitative data we discussed, like simulated interview data derived from real customer reviews or behavioral histories from CRM data. Why is persistent memory so important? Because it allows the agents to build context and history. Their actions and responses aren't just based on the immediate prompt, they're influenced by their accumulated past experiences within the simulation. This enables them to evolve consistently over time and behave in a more realistic, less goldfish memory manner.
Right, so they actually remember what happened to them earlier in the simulation, which influences what they do next.
Exactly. The next technique mentioned is in-context prompting.
In-context prompting, what's that?
This involves providing the underlying LLM with specific, relevant information at the precise moment of interaction. So when an agent is about to act or speak in the simulation, the system feeds it context. This includes details about the agent's current internal state, its relevant behavioral history drawn from its memory, cues from the simulated environment it's currently in, like what's on the virtual store shelf it's looking at, or the specific influencer video it's watching, and any prior decisions it's made in that specific interaction sequence.
So giving it all the relevant info for this exact moment, why is that critical?
It's critical because it allows the agent to generate much more nuanced, situationally appropriate, and lifelike responses and behaviors. Human behavior is incredibly contextual, right? What you do depends heavily on where you are, who you're with, what just happened. Providing that rich context to the AI agent is key to achieving realism in its actions.
Makes sense. Okay, what about retrieval augmented generation, or RA, and agent chaining? Those sound complex.
They are more advanced techniques, and they're crucial for supporting more complex, multi-step decision-making processes by the agents.
Because real life isn't just one interaction.
Exactly. Real-world consumer journeys are rarely single, isolated interactions. They involve stages like becoming aware of a need, considering options, searching for information, making a purchase, using the product, maybe sharing feedback. It's often a sequence of linked steps.
Right.
So, RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, allows the LLM powering the agent to first retrieve relevant information, either from the agent's own extensive memory or potentially from external knowledge sources updated with real-world info before it generates a response or decides on an action. This ensures its actions are informed by its stored knowledge or current facts.
So it looks things up before acting.
In a sense, yes. And agent chaining involves structuring a complex task into a sequence of smaller, manageable steps. These steps might even be executed by potentially different specialized AI models or prompts working together. This allows the simulated agents to carry out sophisticated processes that better mirror real-world behaviors. Things like researching a product online across multiple simulated websites, comparing features, adding an item to a virtual cart, and then deciding later whether to complete the purchase or post a review.
So stringing actions together into a realistic journey. Why are these so important for the simulation?
They're important because they enable the simulation to model those complex, multi-stage journeys that more accurately reflect how people actually behave in the real world. It moves the simulation beyond simple Q&A or single actions towards modeling entire processes.
Okay, that's clear. The final technique mentioned in the source is fine-tuned multimodal models.
Right. This adds yet another layer of fidelity. These aren't just general-purpose LLMs being used. Often, they are models that have been fine-tuned on data specific to the domain being simulated, like beauty or automotive or financial services. Fine-tuning makes their understanding and responses more accurate and relevant for that specific context.
So they know more about the specific industry.
Exactly. And crucially, the term multimodal means these models are trained not just on text, but potentially across other types of data as well, especially visuals.
like images or video. Why does multimodal matter here?
It matters because it allows the agents to react to simulated visual stimuli. Imagine the skincare example. An agent could see a product's packaging design, or a simulated advertisement image, or maybe watch a simulated influencer's video review. These visual inputs could influence its simulated preferences or purchase decisions in ways that a text-only model simply couldn't capture. It adds significant richness and realism to the simulation, bringing it closer to how humans experience the world.
Got it. So it can react to more than just words. The source is really underlining that building these effective simulations isn't trivial at all. It requires this sophisticated combination of cutting-edge AI techniques all working together seamlessly.
Absolutely. It's presented as a significant technical challenge to get this right, to create agents that are both convincingly realistic in their behavior and can operate at the scale needed for meaningful research, like that 10,000 agent example.
And the article notes that early platforms built on these foundations are already emerging. It specifically names two, Simile and Aru.
Yes, and it highlights Aru's partnership with Accenture as a signal that this isn't just confined to academic labs or tiny startups anymore. There's real-world industry confidence and adoption starting to happen, with major players getting involved.
What do these early platforms hint at for the future, according to the source?
These platforms, as described in the article, represent a glimpse into a potential future of market research, one characterized by dynamic, persistent populations of simulated agents that are effectively always on. They act like stand-ins for real customers, constantly present in a simulated market environment, ready to be queried for their opinions at any time, observed for their emergent behaviors, and experimented with by introducing new products, messages, or scenarios whenever a company needs insight.
It sounds like having a perpetual, large-scale focus group and test market available 24/7 on demand.
That's a good way to put it. That's the vision these platforms are working towards.
The article then summarizes the overall impact of this potential technological leap with generative agents. It's clearly positioned as much more than just making the old research process faster or cheaper.
Yes, the source is really emphatic on this point. It argues that this isn't merely an efficiency game, although speed and cost reduction are major benefits. It represents a fundamental reinvention of how market research itself is conducted, and, maybe more importantly, how decisions are ultimately made within businesses based on that research.
Because it overcomes those core limitations that we kept coming back to.
Exactly. It potentially overcomes the high cost, the time delays, and the inherent variability and potential biases associated with recruiting and managing human panels. It tackles the slowness of traditional methods head-on, and it offers a way to get rich, contextual, dynamic feedback at a scale that was previously impossible.
And it creates a research capability that can potentially live inside a company's regular workflow, providing continuous access to insights rather than being a separate periodic project you commission.
Right. The source uses a key term here, fidelity. It argues this shift isn't just about speed, it's a leap in fidelity, meaning it's about creating a more accurate, more dynamic, and more detailed model of reality. A simulation that can potentially capture the nuances, the interactions, the social dynamics, and the evolving behaviors of real consumers in a way that static surveys or small, artificial focus groups simply cannot.
So this leap in fidelity, powered by generative agents and simulated societies, is what the article presents as the core innovation. The thing that moves market research from being this potentially lagging input to becoming a continuous dynamic source of real competitive advantage. It sounds like a genuinely transformative shift if it pans out.
That's certainly how the source positions it, a potential revolution, not just an evolution.
Okay, so we've explored the journey from traditional methods through the first wave of AI bringing efficiency and now into this potential revolution using generative agents and simulations. The article then pivots quite practically. It moves from discussing the technology itself to the crucial question. What does it actually take for companies, whether they're the startups building these new tools or the enterprises looking to adopt them, to succeed in this new AI market research landscape? It makes a strong point that the companies that will ultimately dominate this wave won't just be the ones with the most advanced technology.
Yeah, that's a really important insight from the source, moving beyond just the tech specs. It argues that while having cutting-edge technology is obviously necessary, it's probably not sufficient on its own. Mastering distribution and adoption will be equally, if not maybe even more, critical for winning the market in the long run.
And they use the example of Qualtrics and Medallia again to illustrate this point from the previous wave of software, right?
Exactly. It revisits them to make this point. Qualtrics and Medallia became leaders in the previous era of research software, not just because their online survey tools were technically good for their time, but because they were apparently brilliant at getting those tools widely adopted and embedded.
How did they do that?
The article specifically mentions how they strategically embedded themselves deeply into universities. By doing that, they trained future generations of researchers and marketers on their specific platforms, creating familiarity and preference early on. They also focused on penetrating key industries, becoming the standard go-to workflow tool within major companies in those sectors.
Ah, so they built loyalty and integration, not just features.
Precisely. This created familiarity, user loyalty, and made their platforms integral to how many businesses operated their research functions. That established a significant competitive moat that went well beyond just the underlying technology itself. It became the way things were done.
So the lesson for the current generation of AI-powered research startups seems pretty clear then. Building amazing simulation tech is step one, but figuring out how to actually get it integrated into existing business workflows, how to get it widely adopted by users across different teams, and how to become deeply embedded in customer processes, that's where market leadership will likely be won or lost in this new wave.
Right. The focus needs to be just as much on usability, ease of integration, effective sales and marketing strategies that drive broad adoption as it is on achieving theoretical perfection in the underlying AI models. You have to make it easy for people to use and rely on.
And speaking of theoretical perfection, this brings us to another really crucial and perhaps surprising aspect the article addresses, the whole question of accuracy. When you're moving from asking real people questions to simulating their behavior with AI agents, how do you even measure how good or accurate the simulation is? Is it reflecting reality?
This is a fascinating point the article makes, and it's quite blunt about it. It states very directly that in this nascent category, this new field of generative agent simulation technology for market research, there are currently no established benchmarks or universally accepted evaluation frameworks.
Really? No standard way to measure accuracy?
Apparently not yet. There's no standardized test or agreed upon metric to objectively say, okay, this simulation model from company A is 85% accurate compared to real world outcomes, or to definitively compare the accuracy of one simulation platform against another, or even against traditional human research methods in a consistent way.
Wow. So companies experimenting with this technology are kind of flying blind when it comes to industry standards for accuracy.
To a degree, yes, according to the source. The consequence is that companies that are early adopters often have to define their own internal metrics for what success looks like. They need to figure out what constitutes good enough performance for their specific use cases. Is it predicting general trends? Is it matching directional outcomes? And they need to develop their own ways to validate the simulation results, perhaps against smaller scale real-world tests or historical data where possible.
Here's maybe the most surprising finding the source presents on this whole accuracy point. Success for these AI simulation tools, at least right now, doesn't necessarily require them to be 100% accurate or even to perfectly match the theoretical accuracy of traditional expensive methods.
This is arguably one of the most counterintuitive but perhaps commercially realistic insights in the entire article. It reveals that many chief marketing officers, CMOs, that the author spoke with are actually comfortable with outputs from these AI simulation tools that are, get this, at least 70% as accurate as the results they would typically expect from those expensive, time-consuming engagements with traditional consulting firms.
Wait, hang on. 70%? Why would a senior marketing executive accept an insight that's potentially only 70% as accurate as what they believe they could get from a multi-million-dollar traditional study? That seems like a huge compromise.
It does on the surface, but the article explains the crucial trade-off these business leaders are making. They are willing to accept that slightly lower level of theoretical accuracy, that 70% threshold, because the data and insights derived from the simulations are dramatically cheaper.
Okay.
Significantly faster to obtain, think hours or days, not months.
Mhm.
And, importantly, can often be updated or rerun almost in real time as new questions arise or market conditions change. Getting an insight that is 70% directionally correct today for a tiny fraction of the cost is often perceived as far more valuable for informing rapid, iterative decisions than waiting 3 months and spending millions to get an insight that might be 90% or 95% accurate, but arrives too late to influence the current cycle.
Ah, okay. So it's a speed and cost versus perfect accuracy trade-off.
Yeah.
Timeliness and affordability are outweighing theoretical perfection for many practical business decisions.
That's exactly the argument. It highlights a fundamental shift in what businesses are starting to value: speed Cost effectiveness and agility can, in many situations, outweigh the pursuit of perfect but ultimately delayed accuracy.
That good enough threshold, that 70% comfort level, creates a really interesting window of opportunity for startups trying to break into this space, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. In the absence of rigid, industry-wide accuracy benchmarks that everyone has to meet, there's a window for nimble startups to move very quickly. They can get their products into the hands of these early adopter CMOs and other leaders, validate their utility through real-world application, show value through speed and cost savings, and become embedded in workflows even if the underlying simulation fidelity isn't yet perfect or fully validated against some future standard. They can essentially help define what good looks like by getting their product into production and proving its practical value before strict standards are universally agreed upon and potentially harder to meet.
Get in early while the rules are still being written, essentially.
Something like that. The article also highlights a key risk for startups operating in this kind of environment, though.
Which is?
The risk, according to the source, is less about their AI outputs being slightly imperfect in these early days and more about the temptation to over-engineer their solutions in the lab. Startups might get stuck in this loop of endlessly trying to achieve theoretical 99% accuracy, perfecting the model in isolation, delaying their product launch, and that crucial iterative development cycle based on real user feedback.
Letting perfect be the enemy of good, or in this case, the enemy of fast and useful.
Exactly. So, the recommended strategy, implicitly and explicitly in the source, is to prioritize speed to market, focus on integration into customer workflows, and nail down distribution.
Get it out there.
Get it out there. The companies that succeed will likely be the ones that get their tools actually used by customers early on, learning and improving rapidly based on real usage patterns and feedback, rather than waiting indefinitely to perfect the technology in isolation. The risk is that startups that delay for endless refinement or get stuck in lengthy, non-committal pilot programs while striving for perfect fidelity will simply miss the market opportunity as others move into production, start accumulating valuable usage data, and build those sticky workflow integrations.
It's about momentum and real-world validation over theoretical perfection.
That seems to be the key takeaway for startups in this space, according to the article.
Okay. The article then makes a pretty strong case for why it believes AI-native research companies, the ones built from the ground up around this technology, are fundamentally better positioned to dominate this future landscape than the traditional market research firms or the big consulting giants. What are the core reasons it gives for that advantage?
It lays out several contributing factors. First, it argues that while the legacy firms, the incumbents, might have access to vast amounts of historical panel data, their fundamental business models, their internal workflows, their organizational structures are simply not built for automation at the level AI enables.
Right, they're built around people and services.
Exactly. They're structured around human expertise, manual processes, high-touch service delivery. This creates significant organizational inertia, making it incredibly difficult for them to quickly and fully pivot to a fundamentally software and AI-driven model, even if they want to. Their whole system is optimized for the old way.
They'd be disrupting themselves, in a way.
Potentially, yes. In stark contrast, the new AI native players are starting with a clean slate. They have, according to the source, already developed purpose-built tooling specifically designed for things like AI-moderated qualitative research and these advanced agent-based simulation techniques. Their entire technological and operational stack is being built with AI at its absolute core from day one.
And presumably their incentives are different too.
That's another crucial point highlighted. AI-native companies are structurally incentivized to push the frontier of what's possible with AI in research. Their entire business model depends on innovation in this specific area. They aren't burdened by the need to protect existing, potentially highly profitable revenue streams tied to manual processes or traditional consulting services, which can be a major constraint for legacy players who might understandably fear cannibalizing their established businesses.
So the startups can move faster and more aggressively towards the AI future because they have less to lose from the past.
That's the idea. And related to that, the article argues that these AI native players are uniquely positioned to potentially own both critical layers of this new ecosystem. The data layer, which involves sourcing, cleaning, synthesizing the diverse data needed to train the models and seed the agents, and the simulation layer, the core technology that actually generates the insights and simulates the behavior. They can build these tightly integrated pipelines using AI throughout, from data acquisition all the way to insight generation.
And the source uses that original generative agent simulations of 1,000 people paper Again, to illustrate this integration, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Showing the AI native model in action.
Yes, it points out a fascinating detail from that academic paper. The authors actually relied on agent profiles that were seeded using insights derived from real interviews that were conducted by AI.
Whoa. So AI interviewing people to get data to train AI agents to simulate people.
Exactly. It's a perfect illustration of the potential AI native approach. Using AI tools to gather the input data, like AI-conducted interviews or analysis of online text, and then using that AI-generated or processed data to fuel the AI simulations. It shows how these companies are building, or could build, these end-to-end AI pipelines that integrate data collection, processing, and simulation generation in a seamless, automated fashion. Legacy firms might struggle to replicate that level of integration quickly.
Okay, that makes the advantage clear. However, getting the technology right and even mastering distribution and adoption, those aren't the only hurdles. The article mentions an important integration challenge that these new AI research tools face within customer organizations.
Right. It points out a couple of related challenges on the adoption front. First, for these AI-powered insights to have their maximum potential impact within an organization, they need to be applicable and crucially accessible beyond just the traditional users like the marketing department or the UX research team.
They need to break out of those silos again.
Exactly. The insights need to reach and influence product development teams who are building roadmaps, strategy teams who are shaping overall corporate direction, and perhaps even operations teams who might be looking for efficiency gains based on understanding customer behavior patterns. Why is this broad application so important? Because it dramatically magnifies the value of the research investment and makes it a more integral, foundational part of daily business operations across the board, rather than just a niche resource for a couple of departments.
Makes sense. More users, more value.
Yeah.
What's the second part of that integration challenge?
The second part is about striking a very delicate balance with the level of service and support these AI companies provide. They need to offer just enough human support to help customers effectively adopt and utilize these sophisticated new simulation tools
Mhm.
without accidentally recreating the heavy, expensive human overhead and consulting model of the traditional agencies they're trying to disrupt.
So they need to help customers use the tool but not become a service company themselves.
Precisely. They need to guide users, help with initial setup and potentially complex simulation design, and perhaps provide some level of ongoing expert support or interpretation. But they can't allow themselves to morph into just another human-driven service firm because that would negate the core costs and scalability advantages that their AI technology is supposed to provide in the first place. It requires a really careful, probably product-led approach to customer success and implementation.
Yeah, that sounds like a really delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
You have to provide the necessary hand-holding for a complex new technology, but without becoming the very thing, the expensive service model that you were designed to replace.
It is. It requires, presumably, a deep understanding of both the technology's capabilities and limitations, and also the practical realities of how large organizations actually integrate new tools and new types of insights into their often complex and ingrained operational processes. It's not just about the tech, it's about the change management, too.
Okay. As we bring this deep dive towards a close, the source paints a very clear picture of the overall situation. It feels like the conclusion is that the long era of market research that often lagged behind the actual pace of business is rapidly coming to an end.
Yes, it concludes by really emphasizing that AI-driven market research is fundamentally transforming how companies can understand their customers and markets. It pulls together the key methods we've discussed, from the potential of advanced simulation using generative agents to the already proven acceleration of analysis and insight generation from more traditional data sources.
And the competitive implications of this shift are framed as being pretty significant.
The article is quite direct on this. It argues that companies that recognize this transformation is happening and that move relatively early to adopt these AI-powered research tools are positioned to gain faster, deeper insights into their markets and customers. This capability, in turn, allows them to make better, more timely decisions across their business. And ultimately, that unlocks a new and potentially crucial competitive advantage in today's fast-moving marketplace. The implication is clear. Staying with the old, slow, expensive ways likely means falling behind competitors who embrace these new capabilities.
The source leaves us with one final, really thought-provoking idea that kind of encapsulates the significance of this transformation, maybe even beyond just the research department itself. It argues that as the process of actually shipping products or launching services becomes faster and more streamlined across industries, due to advancements in agile development, cloud infrastructure, manufacturing, logistics, etc.,
The execution part gets easier.
right, as execution gets faster and easier, the real competitive advantage increasingly shifts. It lies less in the sheer ability to execute or build quickly, and more in fundamentally knowing what to build in the first place. Getting the strategy right becomes paramount.
That's a really profound point to end on, isn't it? And it connects directly back to the potential of this AI-driven research. How does AI-powered market research, particularly this potential for running sophisticated simulations with generative agents, help companies know what to build more effectively than traditional methods could?
How does it?
Well, potentially by providing these incredibly rapid, iterative, and continuous testing cycles for new ideas, new features, new messages, by allowing for the simulation of potential market reactions before significant real-world resources are committed, by offering a potentially deeper, more nuanced understanding of how different customer segments might respond to different approaches, and by providing this continuous stream of feedback from a dynamic, simulated population that's always available.
So it reduces the guesswork in strategy.
That's the promise. It means companies can potentially gain much higher confidence in their product strategies, their marketing approaches, their overall direction, based on a much richer, faster, and more iterative feedback loop, hopefully ensuring they're focusing their now faster execution capabilities on building the right things for the market, the things customers actually want or need.
That definitely gives us, and you listening, a lot to consider. So for you, our listener, here is a final thought to mull over, directly inspired by the possibilities presented in this source material. Given these rapid advancements we've discussed in the ability to simulate human behavior and generate market insights from these artificial populations, how might this change the way you think about understanding consumer needs or user needs in whatever context you operate in?
Yeah, think about it. If you could actually query or run experiments on a simulated population that accurately mirrored your target audience, what kinds of questions would you ask? What previously intractable problems would you try to solve? What insights would you seek that were simply out of reach before due to the cost, time, or limitations of traditional methods?
Consider those potential gains in speed, cost reduction, and especially that idea of increased fidelity that this technology promises, as described in the article. How might having access to such a capability, even if it's only 70% accurate but available instantly, alter your approach to business strategy, to product development, to marketing, or to any decision that relies on understanding human behavior?
The potential ripple effects across different industries and different types of decision-making processes seem vast based on this source. It's certainly worth mulling over how this capability might reshape things far beyond just the formal market research function itself. It touches on the very core of how businesses learn and adapt.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the really fascinating and rapidly evolving world of AI reinventing market research.